Shanti and Jeff Feldhans are best-selling authors, popular speakers, and internationally renowned social researchers. Nearly 20 years ago, this average couple stumbled over some things that they just didn't get about each other. And they've been using their analytical backgrounds to help other semi-confused couples like us decode each other ever since.
Both with graduate degrees from Harvard. Dang, y'all smart. Shanti and Jeff are the authors and co-authors of many groundbreaking books such as For Women Only, For Men Only, The Kindness Challenge, and Thriving in Love and Money. That's a big thing.
Yeah.
Their eye-opening findings are regularly featured in media ranging from the Today Show and the New York Times to Family Life and Focus on the Family. They all over the place.
As the primary researcher, Shanti is always in the middle of her next research project, while attorney entrepreneur Jeff is always in the middle of his next technology company startup. The Feldhans and their 2 children live in Atlanta, Georgia. So we're going to quickly say a prayer and toss it over to them. Father God, we are so grateful for this opportunity, and we cannot wait to hear more about how to have a happy marriage, God. We ask that you allow Jeff and Shanti to speak your words, God, to your people so that we can strengthen our marriage, God, so that we can become strong. Thank you for the opportunity to be proactive in our marriage, to seek wise counsel, Lord Jesus, God, and to apply what it is that we're learning in every session, every month, to build a better kingdom, Lord Jesus, God. We love you. We put you first in all that we do, and we bless your holy name. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Over to you, Shanti and Jeff.
Well, thanks, Corey, Marla. And thank all of you who helped us out with that research project the last time we were on.
Seriously.
I mean, that was huge. I mean, it really is. The information is going to be so helpful to folks all over the world.
Yeah, and we can't wait. There's going to be, once we're done with all the analysis, because it's going to take us months to go through all the analysis. But once we're done, I know that Matt and Angel are like,
we want to
come on and give us like a sneak peek of what you found. So we definitely will, because you guys are a big part of that.
And I want to thanks for having us back, and coming back to hear us.
They're going to be tired of us.
Yeah, well, I mean, seriously, I know you guys have things that you could be doing with this time. Life is busy, so the fact you're, excuse me, back again, really appreciate it.
Yeah, and I'm glad you're investing in your marriage. And you need to cough.
Sure do. I'm better.
You're better. Okay, so what we're going to talk about tonight is a complete pivot from what we talked about last time. So a couple months ago, we were on talking about the love and money research, and marriages and money obviously is such a big deal. We're going to pull back a bit and talk about one of our other projects, which was so fun. And it was the book that actually Angel showed you guys that she's going to give to the small group. And it
was about 8 years ago.
7, 8 years ago, something like that. And the book is called The Surprising Secrets of Highly Happy Marriages. And we ended up doing this study to try to figure out what on earth makes the happiest couples so happy. What is it that they're doing differently than everybody else? Even people in actually really good marriages that may not just be at the very highest end of the scale of happiness, but even like good marriages, not to mention marriages that are struggling a little bit or having some issues. What is it that those people in those highly happy marriages to teach us?
And it was one of the most fun research projects, because
it was fun.
As we did it, it was several years. And how it would work, how it always starts with our research projects is we just kind of do random interviews, try to figure out kind of what we're hearing. And so every time we would go to some venue, church, for a marriage conference that we were speaking at, we'd ask them to identify 3 or 4 couples in their congregation church that they thought were really happy in their marriage. And so we would sit down and ask them questions, and it would always start out the same. We'd say, what do you guys attribute your successful, happy marriage to? And they would both look at each other and say, we communicate well. And then we'd go, okay, what's that mean? And they said, we communicate well. And nobody
What do you do?
do.
We communicate well.
And most people, even the happiest couples, couldn't necessarily describe the things that they were doing that could be attributed to their happiness. So over about a year of just talking with these people, we began to see different threads. They use different words for it and different ways to describe it, but we started to see these things that seemed in common.
I've heard the same thing 87 times.
Yeah.
I think there might be something there.
So then we did the research. One of the things that probably these folks are wondering is, how do you identify who the happy couples are when you're doing an anonymous survey?
So the way that we identified the happiest couples, which is relevant to everything that we're going to be telling you now, we broke people into 3 groups based on their answers on the nationally representative survey. And it was similar in some ways to the survey that you guys helped us with. It's called a matched pair survey, which is that these couples are anonymous. This was with a big national survey company. This wasn't done a little informally, like the one that we were doing with you, where, you know, it's you all contributing on our platform. This was on a national survey company's platform. They were doing it. But the way that it worked,
and they charged us
for it. It costs a lot of money to do these. But the way that they did it is actually very relevant, is because there was this whole mechanism where the answers would be anonymous, but they would know that, like, husband 212 is married to wife 212. They don't know who the people are, but they know that these 2 people are married to each other. And it was done so that these people were taking these surveys completely separately, completely independent of each other. They would never know what their spouse answered on the survey unless they talked about it afterwards, but you know, they could lie if they wanted to. And so these were anonymous and independent. And what we did was we asked, as part of the survey, in the middle of the survey, we asked one question that was kind of our sneaky filter question. And it was, are you generally happy in your marriage these days and enjoying being married? And the answer choices were 1 to 5. And 1 was yes, exclamation point, like we're really happy. Number 2 was yes, most of the time. Number 3 was sometimes yes, sometimes no. 4 was yeah, not really. And 5 was no, exclamation point. And what we did was, if the husband and the wife anonymously and independent of each other, never knowing what the other person said, if both those people said yes, exclamation point, if both those people answered number 1, those are the people we wanted to talk to. Those are the ones that we wanted to see, how did they answer it differently than somebody else? And there were plenty of happy couples. And there were plenty of people who answered yes most of the time, or maybe one person said yes, exclamation point, and one person said yes most of the time. And that group ended up being the happy couples. But not the highly happy couples. And then if either of the couples said 3, 4, or 5, which is kind of the, you know, because you can have somebody say, yeah, we're happy. But if the spouse says like,
no, we're not,
then you would say, okay, maybe they're fine. They could be sort of a so-so marriage, but you wouldn't put them in kind of the happy category. So those are the 3 groups we ended up doing. And we wanted to know how the highly happy couples answered differently from everybody else.
Can I jump in with one quick thing?
Yes, of course.
This was done in a very kind of scientific environment. So I'm just telling y'all, don't go at the end of this and say, how would you have rated us? Nothing good will come from that conversation.
Yes,
because exactly. If one of you goes, yeah, we're okay, and the other one was yes, exclamation point, I thought that
there was a whole scientific process that was involved in getting that answer. So it's not the same environment. Anyway, but what we want to share with you is, what is it that we found were these secrets? of the people who we call the yes couples, the people who said, yes, I'm enjoying my marriage and enjoying being married, that they did, what is it that they did differently from everybody else? Even the couples that said we generally have a happy marriage. And what we found, just so you all know, we're going to start sort of sharing a bunch of the secrets in a second. But the thing that's really important about this that I want to mention, that's a big picture, is to realize the importance of having, this is going to sound funny, but role models for marriage. It is really interesting how often, without intending to, in order to improve our marriages, we're focusing on fixing problems. And there's nothing wrong with, if you're in counseling, for example, because you need to go through some counseling, it's great, dig out the problems in order to surface them and fix them. That's fantastic. And, if you're at a Marriage Strong event, or if you're going to some other marriage conference, or reading a book about, some marriage problem and how to fix it, there's nothing wrong with that. But if that's all that we do, we're only focusing on the problems. And there's kind of this, wow, we need to be able to not just focus on the problems and study the problems. We have to study what one researcher called the bright spots. What are the great marriages doing differently? Study
And
those. Copy those people. After all, if you want to look like Jesus, you study Jesus. You don't study the Pharisees. Right? And I mean, it's fine to study the Pharisees. What are they doing wrong? And try to be the opposite of that and fix that. There's nothing wrong with it. But you really want to study Jesus. And so what is it that these happiest marriages, that God has given them something that often they didn't even understand what they were doing differently? What are those things? So we identified 12 little simple habits that a lot of people didn't even recognize made a difference, but it made a difference statistically once we actually did the big survey.
So number one,
jump in. Okay, so we're only going to be able to get to like 4 or 5 because we're going to run through this quickly. But number one, and the most important one, by the way, I would highly recommend, if you have one of these, write this down. Like post this on your refrigerator or something. This will make a difference. Post a note on your mirror. The highly happy marriages, one of the key things that we think is almost impossible to have a happy marriage without this, is that these couples, they would choose to believe the best of their spouse's intentions towards them, even when they were legitimately hurt. Write down "believe the best" on a Post-it note and put it on a mirror, because the key is everybody gets hurt. Even in the most happily married couples, everybody hurts each other's feelings once in a while. And like even the best Christian husband and wife can be a jerk to each other once in a while. And I'm seeing some of you nod, and I'm glad, because that means it's not just me. And okay, you're trying to comment here. He's trying to comment. But the key is that everybody can hurt each other's feelings. The problem is that most of us, the natural human tendency that we have, and it's subconscious, is that if Jeff hurts my feelings, there's a natural feeling that kind of goes, ow, like he knew how that would make me feel and he said it anyway. And what you're thinking, even though it's kind of subconscious, but what you're thinking is he doesn't care about me, right? Or if a guy, it sounds different, the internal dialogue, the husband may be thinking nothing I do is ever good enough for her. I can't please her, can't make her happy, right? Like that's the internal dialogue. And it's that means she doesn't care about me, right? And the happiest couples, they would flip it. And sometimes it was a choice, like a conscious decision. Sometimes they had practiced it enough that it had become automatic and it had become a habit where they would still have that, ow, that hurt my feelings, or that I feel like nothing I do is ever good enough for her. They'd still have that, but then they would stop and they would go, no, No, like the wife would think, no, I know he loves me. I know he cares about me. So he must not have known how that would make me feel, or he wouldn't have said it. They'd flip it. Or he would think, no, I know she appreciates me. It doesn't feel like that right now, but I know she does. So she must not realize how that came across. And what you're doing is you are believing the best of your spouse's motivations towards you rather than the worst.
And an important part of all of this, of all of the research, was that this wasn't dependent on both people, both individuals in the marriage doing these things.
We should have said this at the beginning.
Just one member of the marriage applying these principles, this information, it can transform the marriage. And that's a fantastic thing. And all of us are kind of looking for, in addition to living our lives in a Christ-like manner, we are all looking for peace in our marriages and in our households. And this information that we gained from these happy couples leads to that.
Yeah.
One thing that I stumbled across while we were doing this research was a study that was done by a professor at the University of Maryland with a bunch of college students. And I'll just got to get it out there that I love college students, because for $20 they will subject themselves to just about anything. And so there's always this great data that professors or researchers can gain from college students, even though they're kind of weird in other things. But nevertheless, it's good information.
It's good for sociology.
This particular study was called The Power of Good Intentions. And in it, they had a subject matter, a subject, which was a person, and he or she was sitting in a chair and hooked up to all these different biometric measuring devices. So they would register heart rate, sweat, all of these sorts of reactions that the person would have in their body. And they were also hooked up with a long cable that was led behind a partition or a curtain. And they were told that there's a person sitting on the other side, and there is a device that cable is connected to, that when a red button is pushed, it will administer an electric shock to them. And it would. I mean, it would give an electric shock.
All these college students paid
that was
$20,
part of it.
and that was part of it.
They were also told different things about the person that was supposedly sitting behind this curtain. In one instance, they were told that the individual knows that when they push the button, it will give the person a shock, but it also helps them try to win money. So something good could come from it.
That's what the person giving the shock is thinking.
Or they were told that another person is there, and when they hit the red button, it's only on accident. They didn't mean to do it. And then there's a third person that they're told is sitting there who knows that it will administer a shock, and they think that's kind of cool. They don't really care. And so
I think it's kind of fun to cause pain.
Here's what the researchers found out. The shock administered in all three instances was exactly the same voltage, all of that sort of stuff. But depending on what the person believed about the shocker, their physiological response was different. If they thought that the person was doing it because they didn't care, it hurt, and it hurt a lot, and it registered on all the measuring devices. If they thought the person was doing it only on accident, it hurt less, and it measured less. And if they thought the person had their best interests at heart and was trying to help them win money, it hurt considerably less. Nothing had changed in the shock. The only thing that had changed what was going on in the recipient's mind about the party behind the curtain. If they believed the best about the intentions of that person, whatever the pain was limited.
Felt less. And it works the same way in marriage. It works absolutely the same way. In our marriages with each other, we will cause pain to each other. We just will. We're fallible people in a broken world. Like, we can be sinful, we can be selfish, we can be tired, you can be hangry, you can be mad at each other. We're going to cause each other pain, even in the best marriages. The key, though, is what you choose to believe about your spouse's intentions. And here's the amazing thing, is that when we did the survey of these people, there were these three groups, remember? And the third group were the people who were in kind of difficult marriages. And there were people in that group of difficult marriages that were like really difficult, in a significantly difficult space, and very, very challenged. What we found is that this idea that the other person cares about me, that they have my best interest in heart, this is not wishful thinking. This was true of 99.26 something percent, like almost 100%. We worked it out. You would have to fill a stadium with 1,261 people in order to find one that didn't care. That's how many people you'd have to load up in order to find one that had gotten to a place in their marriage that was so bad that they just didn't care anymore about their spouse.
Didn't care if they hurt their feelings, didn't care
about their spouse
at all.
And even in the most struggling marriages, that number was 97 something percent, like in terms of caring about their spouse. And so the key there is to recognize that the issue isn't whether the other person cares about us, because they do. Statistically, it would be incredibly unusual for your spouse to not care about you anymore. They do care. If you want a happy marriage, you have to let yourself believe it. That's the key. That was what was different, is these couples that had stopped believing that their spouse had their best in mind. And so the key starting point is to go, okay, that hurt. They hurt my feelings. She, questioned my decision, whatever that is, but it doesn't mean they don't care about me. They do. And look for a more generous explanation than, well, they don't care. Okay, so
number 2.
Should we move on to number 2? Okay, this is Jeff's favorite one. And I think it's the favorite one because it sort of, I hate to say it, it sort of flies in the face of some standard marriage advice.
I would bet that if we've got small group leaders out there and they've advised on marriage stuff, they may have given this advice before, particularly, of course, but to couples that are in premarital counseling and all of that sort of stuff.
We used to give this advice
too.
And Matt and Angel, I apologize in advance if I'm like messing you up in this, like if you do premarital counseling, because this is one of these things that everybody, when we would ask the couples, these happy couples, and, they're ready with their answers. Things like, well, we just communicate. Well, one of the other things that we heard from these happy couples is it's really important to not go to bed mad. Like, that's really, really crucial. Don't let the sun go down in your anger. Ephesians 4:26. Don't let the sun go down in your anger. Don't go to bed mad. And we would always say, oh, absolutely. We totally agree. That's important. So do you ever go to bed mad? Well, it's a really important principle, we told this young couple the other day. I'm like, no, I get that it's an important principle, but that's not actually what we're asking you, Mr. and Mrs. Happy Couple. We're wanting to know, do you go to bed mad?
Ever.
And these couples, they tap dance around it. And finally, we discovered that almost 100%, I think out of the 1,000 couples in the study group, there were 3 that didn't ever go to bed mad. And what we found is that it's a good principle. It's a good thing to try to like have that sort of hanging there as a challenge for us. However, the happiest couples had also learned something really important, which is that when you have 2 exhausted, angry, upset people who are trying to duke something out at 1 a.m, like nothing good is going to come from that point on. And
I would say from 9:30 on.
And so one of the things that we found that was essential is that the difference with the happiest couples, it turns out that a lot of them, what they said in practice is that they would actually kind of say nothing good is going to happen from this point on. Let's sleep on it and let's pick this up in the morning. And guess what's the difference? I can testify, says Jordan. Absolutely. Listen, here's the thing that we found that was really, really crucial about this. It turns out that what the happiest couples did, it wasn't different based on what happened the night before. What was different was what happened the next morning. Because the couples that were not the happiest couples, the couples that were the kind of, shakier couples, or even generally happy, but not the most highly happy, they had a much bigger tendency to kind of just hope that issue went away and not deal with it. Like the next morning, just kind of brush it off, whatever. The happiest couples, they didn't do that. If that emotion was still there the next morning, because sometimes sleeping on it like solves it.
It's magic.
Right? Sometimes it's magic. It's like, what was that about? But if that emotion, if that anger, if that upset, whatever that was still there the next morning, they dealt with it. And I thought that was so crucial. And we also learned something really important in the process of trying to come to grips with this fact that, sometimes the happiest couples know when to set something aside and pick it up the next morning, that was one of the secrets. I was worried because all of our findings all the way along have always backed up what the Bible has said all along. And here we were a little worried that it was flying in the face of Ephesians 4:26.
Yeah, and I will say that, by this time when we had done the research, we'd been married 15 years, 15 plus
Ish,
years. Yeah. And Shanti she's a student of the word. And so when we would be having discussions late at night, she would look at Ephesians 4:26 and would say, we need to be obedient. If we want God's favor on our lives, we need to address this.
We can't let the sun go down on our anger.
Exactly.
We have to keep talking.
And I'm a lawyer by training. So I would say, look, we didn't start fighting till the sun was already down. So I have 24 hours before we have to fix this thing. So I'm going to sleep. Probably not the best course of action, but right. That's how I handled it.
So, but the key thing that we were really surprised by once we actually looked at 4:26, and we had a pastor we were talking to about how worried we were that is this anti-biblical, and anyway, he kind of laughed and he's like, okay, let's look at Ephesians 4:26. And when you look at Ephesians 4:26, you will see that Paul, the Apostle Paul, when he's writing this letter to the church in Ephesus, first of all, it's not even about marriage, right? It's about living in community, this whole discussion. And it doesn't say don't go to bed mad, but that's the way it's been interpreted. However, regardless, he said, look at what Paul is saying. And it says, in your anger, do not sin. Don't let the sun go down in your anger. And if you look at your Bible, you'll see a little caret that says, oh, Paul was quoting a verse from the Old Testament. And his audience would have known this verse, this famous verse from the Psalms. And so when you go to Psalms 4:4, y'all can look it up if you want. He's quoting Psalms 4:4, Psalm 4:4. And Psalm 4:4 says, in your anger, do not sin. Think about it overnight and remain silent.
I love the Psalms.
Oh, stop. Anyway, yeah, I still want to work it out overnight. But the key, as this pastor pointed out, is in your anger, do not sin. And if you need to duke it out at 1 a.m. to not sin in your anger, do that. If you need to think about it overnight and remain silent and so you don't say something you're going to regret or agree to something you're going to resent or whatever, if you need to do that, do that. And so the key is, in your anger, don't sin. And that is what we saw from the happiest couples, is often they would the next morning not let it go. That anger would be dealt with. And that's a really important principle, I think, for the happiest couples. The next topic that we want to talk through,
which I love, and we titled it in the book, Boss Your Feelings Around. Most people, when they say, it's just the way I feel, I can't do anything about it. So it's, what can I do? It's how I feel.
And we all have, to some degree, believed that in our culture, like our feelings just are what they are. We can change our actions. We can choose to do the proper thing, even if we're tempted not to, but we can't change our feelings. And it turns out that is absolutely not true neurologically. And what's both clear in both science and scripture that I think is fascinating is that the happiest couples had learned to actually change their feelings. And literally, you could have somebody who had had the worst day, something that had their spouse had done that was so upsetting to them. And legit, like when we would hear the story, you'd be like, okay, I can understand how you'd be upset. Like we do these things to each other. And when we would say, take us through what you would think, literally the person, the husband or the wife, would be thinking, well, I'd be so mad because of this, but then that's not really fair because, my wife always does these amazing things. And, she's such a great mom. And, she always does these things for me, and start on this line of like all this good stuff and then go, why am I being such a jerk? Like, why am I mad? She does all these amazing things for me. And you watch them as they process through, they are talking themselves out of being mad. And that process of focusing on, and this is what there's more than we could get into in this time frame, but this is what the Apostle Paul, in the letter that he wrote to the church at Philippi, this is in Philippians 4, of what the Apostle Paul tells the church: if you want to have a better relationship with somebody, you rejoice. And how do you do that? You think on those things that are excellent. You think on those things that are lovely. You think on those things that are noble, that are worthy of praise, rather than what's worthy of driving you crazy. And that changes your feelings. That's the prescription that God gives us. And it is amazing what happens in your heart, in your mind, when you are mad, when you start rehearsing the good things. It changes your feelings.
Well, people familiar with Psalm 103 too, which is my favorite verse in the Bible, which is says, "Praise the Lord, O my soul, and forget not all his benefits." And then the psalmist proceeds to list the things that God has done in their life. And that's actually, what I would kind of teach myself to do with Shanti. There are so many things that she does that I just take for granted and think, yeah, she just did that. And that's cool.
I thought you were going to say there's so many things that I do that drive you crazy.
Never. But it was when I was driven crazy by something.
Yes.
It was just running through my list and just thanking God for her in these things. And it's not some Jedi mind trick. It works. And
it's the way God has wired us.
It's the way God has wired us.
Give them the example of like my slight messiness.
Okay, so so Shanti is she is the most organized, mentally organized person I know. She carries so much in her head and she can manage all of these things all at once. It's phenomenal. I can't do it. Physical organization, however,
it's not my spiritual gift.
Not so much. And I tend to be I like everything in their place and neat and orderly. And it's just not her. And for the first 10 years of our marriage,
20 years.
Yeah, it was a challenge. And many of our arguments kind of spawned out of that a lot of times. And it wasn't until, when we had when our kids were little, They're 21 and 18 now, but when they were little bitty, and I would come home from a long day,
Yeah.
and there were dishes, not just in the sink, but in
On the
other
sideboard.
places.
Yes, stop.
And maybe some clothes somewhere, not
That
in a
hadn't
basket.
been put in the laundry yet.
Okay, and toys everywhere. And I would go, and then, God just did something in me. And what I remembered going through my mind was, when I lived alone, everything was perfect and in place just the way I wanted it. And I was alone. Those dishes and those other things are evidence that I'm married to this person who loves me and thinks I'm pretty good, pretty cool. And I have 2 little kids that made that mess. And they're in great health, and they're fun, and they're in my life. And it was flipping the frustration to look at the other side. And it changed. It changed me. It didn't necessarily change Shanti, but it changed me, which ended up changing you.
Well, it made me want to try to work harder, to try to keep on top of the dishes or the whatever. I'm still not good with the mail. Like, if anybody has a good thing to do of putting mail somewhere instead of on top of the island, I'd love to hear it, because I've never gotten that nailed down. But the fact that he was willing to look for the whatever is lovely and excellent and worthy of praise made me want to do what I could do in order to adjust to that. That is an example of how you can boss your feelings around instead of letting them boss you around. Mail called a shredder. There we go. That's what I need. Can I shred the bills?
But you have to open it first.
Dang.
And sometimes we just don't get to that.
Yeah. So anyway, okay. So let me mention, because we only have a minute here, I want to mention a fourth of these habits, of these 12 little habits, because this one is sneaky and it's really simple and it's really, really impactful. So the happiest couples, one of the things that they did that we didn't actually realize at first, because it was so simple, we almost missed how big of a deal it was, is that they treated each other first and foremost, primarily as best friends, that they were each other's best friend. And one of the things that we have learned over the years is there was a study that was done years ago on the primary predictor of friendship. What's the primary predictor of friendship?
Most people would say kind of common interests, shared values, hobbies,
similar
temperaments, all of that. Not so. I mean, those are all helpful, but they're not the primary indicator.
The primary predictor of friendship, believe it or not, is geographic proximity. You are the best friends with the people you see the most often and that you spend the most time with. Think about it, right? All of us have had really, really close, intimate friends that moved away, or we moved away, and you love each other and you care about each other, but you're just not as close. Well, it works the exact same way in marriage, is that it is very easy, especially now that we're coming out of the pandemic and we're going back to offices and going back to stores and going back to whatever it is that we do, we're spending less and less time together again. And the thing that makes this best friendship possible is actually just, this is going to sound silly, just hanging out. Like for some people, the date night, like what you guys have been talking about, that is absolutely necessary in order to make sure that you get time together. For other people like us, like we travel a ton together, and sometimes away from the kids. So when we're at home, we don't want to go out and do a date night separately because we want to be with the kids. And so for us, it's literally hanging out. Like, do you want to watch a movie?
Or
do you want to watch Loki?
We spend an hour or an hour or hour or 90 minutes just in the morning drinking coffee together.
Loki. Everybody else likes Loki.
Awesome.
But but the key is it doesn't have to be this big formal, like
Yeah. That's
sit
great if
down
you
over
can do it. That's
candlelight. Like,
great.
it's great if you can do that, but not everybody can do that. And the key is, if you're sharing an experience together, if you're just sitting on the couch next to each other watching Loki together, if you're having coffee, and like for us, we're reading the news and just sharing little snippets of, oh, did you see what happened in the news? It's not like big, deep looking to each other's eyes conversations, but you're best friends, you're hanging out. And that is so protective of a relationship, because it doesn't solve the big marriage problems, but it makes it easier to solve. And if you're friends, you can solve anything. So, okay, Loki and coffee Wednesday morning. I like that. Loki on Wednesday morning. Huh. All right. So this is just to get you started.
Yeah.
Don't try to do all of these things at once, by the way. I think that
Yeah.
that's important that we say that. You know, pick one. If you're going to end up go through the list of 12, don't try to do them all. You'll get overwhelmed. Just pick one or two that matter. Maybe you ask your spouse which one of these would matter the most to you, and you try to do those. So we will toss it back to you guys, because I think we're a couple minutes over.
Awesome. That was so good. I think Corey was like giving you air high fives, Jeff, about
Yes, he
clutter
was.
and all that stuff as he's like looking.
I was like, is he here? Is that does he know my life?
But it was so good. We definitely want to leave some time for you guys to ask any questions that you do have. But while we're waiting for those questions, can y'all just chat in the chat pod or type in the chat pod, like which one of those four like spoke the most to you that you're like, we have to do this today? Can somebody share? I know for me, I think it was, the
All of them?
all of them, really, as I'm trying to think. But I think for sure, I also have just started watching Humans on Netflix, and I am a firm believer about the fact that you can change your thought process and you can
Yeah.
change your mind. And I'm also a big fan of Dr. Caroline Leaf, who also says
Yes.
the same thing. And so I think like that just, it does make me think about like the first couple of years of Corey and I's marriage, where I am a wherever I am, if the shoes come off, they come off there, and that's where they'll stay.
Oh, thank you for saying that, Marla.
Yes,
It's not just me.
But he would complain so much before, and then he just became like, okay with, all right, that's where the shoes are. And it just became less. And even though maybe we didn't recognize that it was like he's changing his mind about the fact that I'm just not going, it's not that I don't want to pick up the shoes, it's just not what I like think about. I'm thinking about dinner and all these other things. And he's just become okay with like, it's not worth the fight. And I think sometimes that really is what it kind of boils down to. What about you?
I think for me, number 4, the best friends. And I think for us, for me personally, that was huge and has been huge in our marriage, because we were best friends, when we got married. Marla was the first woman that I had been with where there was nothing sexual that happened before we got married. Like,
Right.
I mean, nothing. And that was a huge thing for me, and just from where I was coming from. And
That's
so,
awesome.
yeah, starting our marriage as friends for a year with like no type of sexual like contact, and just building it purely just off of who she was as a friend, made the world of difference, And so that was really cool to hear you say that was a
Yeah.
indicator, and the geographical
That's cool.
location of how
great.
friendships are built. Yeah, I mean,
Just hanging out.
yeah, when you are in close
Yeah.
proximity, it just makes it so easy to
It
just
it
build.
is it is easy these days, thankfully, to approximate that, even if you physically can't always be together. Like, there's probably some people here, on the Zoom that are like, well, that doesn't help me because I'm a traveling salesman, and I'm gone 4 days a week. But we have Zoom, right? Text messages, FaceTime, like there's all sorts of ways that you can approximate that even when you physically can't be together. It's just about investing in your friendship.
Yeah. And someone brought up the fact of not going to bed mad, or it's okay, but not staying up if you're too angry to actually talk it through. I think for me, connecting Psalms 4:4 was
Mhm.
pivotal. I don't know how many people in here were like, "Oh, I hadn't heard that before,"
Right.
but it really helped
Yeah.
me. Sure. Are there any questions that we can ask Shanti and Jeff while they're still here? Do you all have any questions that we want to
I
ask?
know there are questions.
Definitely going to share the recording. It'll be on our Facebook Live. We'll share it back out. Yes. What was 3 again? So can you talk about? I would prefer you say it this
Just maybe
week.
give a recap of all 4
Yeah,
real
let's
quick.
recap all 4 real quick.
So these are 4 of the 12. Okay, so the first was to believe the best of your spouse's intentions towards you, even when you're legitimately hurt, right? Like even when it's legit. The second one was to recognize that sometimes you need to be willing to like go to bed mad. I know that sounds bad, but to be willing to say, we're not getting anywhere. Let's pick it up in the morning, and then actually pick it up in the morning if that emotion is still there. And then rather than sort of brushing it under the rug. Okay. And then the third one was to boss your feelings around rather than letting them boss you around. That God has given us this ability to change our feelings. Philippians 4:8, think on whatever is lovely. So, this is Corey. You were like, those shoes, those are going to drive me crazy, but no, those are a sign I have a hot wife in my house.
Shoes, yes.
There you go. And number 4 is to hang out, to treat each other like best friends, and to really invest in that by hanging out, whether that's date nights or just watching Loki. And somebody wanted to know if Loki was a type of coffee. No, it's a Disney Plus show. That's awesome. Marvel.
They also want to know where they can find your book and the title. We did put the title in the chat, but tell us where we can.
Yes, it's called The Surprising Secrets of Highly Happy Marriages.
Nice.
So,
And
you
where
can
can
get that on Amazon or wherever.
Yeah.
Somebody said, what if you work different shifts? That's a perfect example. So we actually interviewed in our study group, we actually had quite a few couples who were in the highly happy group who worked opposite shifts, which was really interesting. And because of the difficulty in trying to find that time together. And that was the solution, is they had to find it. They had to make it, because it wasn't going to happen naturally, because somebody would be, exhausted and wanting to go to sleep when somebody was just starting.
So tell it real quick, the story of the couple that really highlights that.
I don't know which one.
The couple with a couple of young kids, and they were just, being pulled in all different directions.
Yeah.
And she was saying, we just didn't like each other. And then she realized that she added up all the time that they had spent together alone, where they were just actually kind of hanging out
each week, like how much time per
and
week.
What was it?
And she added it up, and it was like 15 minutes a week. Like, no wonder. And she was like, no wonder we are at each other's throats. Like, we're not even friends anymore. And so what they did, this is an example of like
one person
being purposeful,
and it was one person.
Yeah, it wasn't both of them. It was one person making the move, which is what Jeff was talking about, that one person's choice to do any of these things can be completely transformative to the whole marriage. So in her case, she looked at their schedule, and they had 3 little kids, and they had these crazy work schedules. And so there wasn't a ton that they could change right off the bat. The only thing that they could change immediately was that the husband would take the 6-year-old, 7-year-old to T-ball twice a week. And she said, there is no reason in the world why I have to load up a toddler and a baby and drive to T-ball with him, except that is 20 minutes in the car on the way there and 20 minutes on the way back twice a week. And she said that is literally all they did to change at the beginning. And that started to give them time to just like reconnect again
and learn how to talk again
and like tell each other what was going on. And here's what happened at work today. And like the kind of stuff that friends talk about. And that was the beginning of being able to work on all the other stuff. So that's an example of you working opposite shifts. You're going to have to work at it. But we had plenty of highly happy couples that worked opposite shifts and had figured out how to work on it. So
Yeah, you definitely have to be creative. One of the questions was, how do you make time when you have multiple young kids?
Yeah.
A candlelight when they're in bed, or Corey and I, when our kids were able to go to Awana or some type of group, we would go to dinner at that time. We just had
Yeah.
to be intentional
Find it.
and put it in the calendar. I think we talked about
Mhm.
that a couple of
Yes.
months ago.
I think it was Montel and Kristen who told us a while ago, how do we treat our calendars for like work? And, we were like, well, if it don't get put in the calendar, it generally doesn't happen. And so he said, well, take that same type of priority with the time with your wife and the time with your spouse, put it in the calendar.
Yep. That is so 100% true. The key for all of these things is they're all really simple, but they're easy to not be done
Right.
unless you're thinking about it. And once you think about it, it's actually not like,
It's not that hard.
it's not that hard. They're all relatively simple things. It's just we don't think about it. Like, we let life just kind of carry us along. So
And we don't think that those little things will have the impact that it does.
right. Yeah, exactly. Oh my gosh, I love what DeWitt and Marisol said. We talk in the bathroom a lot, hiding from our kids. I love that one. That is awesome. But that's a silly example, but it's a really good example, right? Like, sometimes you just got to do what you got to do.
Yep.
And so that's a silly one. Okay, I know we have some more questions
Yeah,
here.
there were two that
Yeah.
popped up. One was, do you guys have a study guide that goes along with the book by chance?
This is the one book we've written 20 or something now, and this is the one book that we don't really have a good study guide. And honestly, one of the reasons is because I've worked on it a couple times. It is each chapter is really short.
Mhm.
Like, there are these little, like, bite-sized things. So literally, working through the chapter is almost its own study guide. Like, asking each other, the key to me is ask each other, do we do this? Can we do this? And how do we do this? Like, each little one of the 12.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then the other question was, do you guys have a podcast by chance?
We actually separately, okay, so I have a podcast with Family Life,
Okay.
and it's called Married with Benefits. And there's a questions every wife is asking season and a questions every husband is asking season.
And I'm not on those.
Well, you join us, but yeah. So it's me and Brian Goins, who's one of the Family Life leaders, that
Awesome.
we do this with Family Life. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. Are there any last questions, guys? We have them here now. This is the best opportunity to ask. But I do want to say, I love how you suggested taking one at a time. I'm a person who, like, hey, I want to do everything all at the same time. We're going to do all 12. Okay, Corey? And he's like, slow down. So one at a time. More prizes. Next month, you got to come next month, and you have to invite a friend.
I do want to highlight that someone did put in the chat that you guys have a Devo on YouVersion for Biblical Secrets to a Happy Marriage.
We do.
That it's a good pair with the book. Apparently they've already gone.
And that is true. If you do YouVersion, if you have the YouVersion Bible app, it's called Biblical Secrets to a Happy Marriage. And that is a good 2-week walk you through these secrets from a Bible verse standpoint. Yeah.
That's so good.
So thank you for that. Whoever said that suggestion. It's a good suggestion.
Yeah, thanks, Daryl and Lashana.
Awesome. So we're going to go ahead and close out. Just a couple of reminders. We'll be back next month